with a circle in the center of our page about the size of a baseball or an orange. And as I mentioned, your key to success here is to draw lightly. That is your whole answer to getting a great sketch. Keep going over the circle as well. That's something I recommend. And this will allow you to have a better circle, because if you just draw one, the chances of you getting a perfect circle on your first go are, that's a little unlikely. So we're going to just add in a bunch of shapes. And then I'm going to start placing in my construction lines. Start with a vertical line. Go right through the center of the circle. And this character in the film is supposed to be about 15 years old. And when you draw a character that's on the younger side, more youthful, that typically means you place in a lower eye line. So for Mirabel, I'm placing it just under halfway. I'm not going to put it too low because we're not drawing like the baby version of Mirabel, but we also don't want her to look too old or too mature in our sketch. Now her face is round, but it's not a perfect circle. We are going to bring down a bit of a chin for her. And I do this by pulling from the sides of my circle down to the center line, which creates a slight point in the bottom of that circle. So think of it as like more of a balloon shape now than a circle. Now, for those of you who have sketched here with us before, you know that we like to use an approach called general to specific. And this means that we block out some of our larger, simpler shapes first. We usually try to get our silhouette at the beginning. And this helps you really lay out where your drawing is, and then you can just fill in the details later. So I've placed in her ears 2 C curves, one on each side, and this will go, as you can see, basically where that eye line is. Now, for a portrait, this usually includes the neck and shoulders of your character. And so for Mirabel, bring down 2 letter J curves, one on each side of that construction line. And then I'm just going to simply add in some sloping lines for her shoulders. Now, in this film, she wears this shirt with this really cool skirt, and computer animated films are getting more and more detailed with each movie. It's pretty amazing, actually. And so one of the areas we see a lot of details on the costumes of these characters. But I think if you've seen this movie, you'll probably agree, I don't think we've ever seen a costume as detailed as Mirabel's, because not only are there like patterns on her clothing, but she embroiders things on top of it. And so there's like a whole like tapestry of images and symbols all over her clothes, which make it really, really fun to look at. I'm starting on the left shoulder, and I've drawn in what looks like a letter Y here. This is the start of an insect that she's embroidered on her shoulder, and this insect is a symbol for the miracle that happened to her family. Does anybody know what I'm talking about? Butterflies. Yeah, we see a lot of butterflies in this film. And again, they're there to kind of represent that special gift that was given to her family, the house, but also all their gifts that came with it. I'm pausing here because we've laid some groundwork. I'm going to go back and basically lock in everything from the eye line down on my sketch. And if you've never heard of the term locking in lines, it just means you're going back and you're darkening in what you like about your drawing. When you do this, it's going to make all the best parts stand out. So make sure that anything you're not happy with, like if you made a mistake on something, those things you want to leave light, and they're going to fade into the background as you go. Now, this character, as I mentioned, she embroiders on her clothes, and one of the things I really like about that detail is it's not really talked about in the film, it's just something we see. But the filmmakers actually spoke to that little detail, and they said that they chose to give Mirabel this creative outlet of embroidery because they felt like with her situation of being the only member of the family without a special gift, she would want a creative outlet that she could gain confidence in, something where she could express herself, and also something to keep her busy. Like her family, as we saw in the film, is constantly helping the community, doing all sorts of things around the house. So she needs something that she can, again, call her own. And so they thought embroidery was a pretty cool one. And what I like about this is it really acts as like a visual for how much she loves her family. Because in addition to things like this butterfly, she's actually embroidered a symbol representing every single family member she has, and you can spot them all on her skirt. And so it's like a piece of her family is always with her. She always has like something that represents them, which I think is a really cool detail. Now, because this is not a real butterfly and this is an embroidered one, we're going to add a bunch of like scribbly lines inside of the wings here to make it feel more like thread work or embroidery. It doesn't have as much of like a realistic look to it. Now, as I mentioned, she has a symbol for every family member, and if we were here drawing every single symbol, this would be like a multiple hour class. So we're going to draw maybe just one. We're going to simplify it. So what I recommend is maybe think of your favorite Madrigal family member and then draw a symbol that represents them. Like you could draw weights for Luisa, you could draw clouds and a rainbow for her tia Peppa, some kind of food for her mom, maybe some animals for her cousin Antonio. Lots of fun options. One of the ones that I like to do are some flowers, because I think it's a pretty easy one to add. What do you think the flowers might represent? Yeah, Isabella, right? Her sister. So feel free to add in whichever symbol you'd like, or you know what? You can even make up your own. It's your drawing. So maybe in your sketch you like, I want her to be celebrating spooky season. So maybe you draw bats and I don't know, little candies or something on her outfit. Totally up to you. Once you've drawn in a symbol though, I would say that's probably the amount of detail we're going to leave on the shirt. You can choose to add as much as you'd like though. Now, I'm going to move on to another accessory of hers, and that's her earrings. And these are like little pom-poms that rest at the bottom of her ears. I like to start by drawing in a small circle on the lobe of each ear. So this is going to be really tiny. Then, just underneath that circle, I'm going to place in a slightly bigger one, just kind of hanging right underneath the ear. Now, when we draw in a rough sketch, even though we don't work with color, we like to shade in certain things to show how dark they are. It's called value in a sketch. So these earrings in the film are like a dark blue, dark purple color. So I shade these in kind of dark, so that way when they're next to something like her hair, you can kind of tell which thing is darker. And so that's something that a lot of artists will do in a rough sketch. Now, our final step for her silhouette is adding in her hair. And speaking of hair, this film is a groundbreaking film when it comes to hair animation. Because if you didn't know this, at least with computer animation, two of the most infamously difficult things to animate are water and hair. They're just really, really tough because both of these things can move in a very unique way. They tend to have a mind of their own. They also react to light differently. They can react to the elements differently. Hair has different textures and colors, different styles. There's so many details about hair that can make it very, very difficult to animate. And so in the early days of computer animation, Disney would often, and really any studio, would try to find shortcuts around animating hair because it was such a challenge. So a great way to look back on these animated films and see if they were trying to take a shortcut is see if the characters have very short hair, their hair in a bun, or their hair in a braid. Because those things, either you don't have to animate, or it's a single object. So Frozen, for example, Elsa has one braid, Anna has two. If their hair is not in a braid, it's in a bun. So it's like a little shortcut. But there were certain films along the Disney timeline where they really pushed forward and tried to challenge themselves. Like one film in particular featured a Disney princess with 70 feet of hair. Which film is that? Tangled, right? Now, what was groundbreaking about Tangled was prior to that, they would animate, as I was saying, hair as a single item or object. Whereas they knew Rapunzel, if she had her hair down, that was not going to look right. Her hair wouldn't feel like hair. So that film was one of the first times where they animated individual strands or groups of hair. So you can actually look up pictures where you can see like the 3D model for Rapunzel and all of her hair sections rigged separately. And it's really amazing because it makes it more believable the way she's animated. And so that was a big step forward. Moana was also a big step forward because in that film they really nailed down how to animate wet hair, wind-blown hair, as well as like a different texture that they hadn't done before, more of like a wavy texture. But this film is really the final level because in this movie, we actually see just in the Madrigal family alone, every single texture of hair represented, and they're all animated amazing. So if you didn't know this, hair can be measured on a scale from 1A to 4C, which represents like the straightest of hair all the way to the curliest of hair. And so, like I said, in her family alone, you could line them up and have each family member really represent a different texture. And so I think it's really amazing how far we've come with animation and specifically computer animation. Now for her hair, I started off with this really weird like giant number 3 on her forehead. This is supposed to be like a loose curl over the front. Start with that first number 3 and then draw another one inside of it. If you just draw one, it's gonna feel like a single strand of hair versus a group of curls. Another thing that I like to do is I like to add in a wavy line that starts to come from the top of the circle, and then it's going to curve down and kind of carve off a piece of each ear. When we do this, it's to make the hair feel like it's more attached to the head. So we actually do this on a few of our characters. It makes it feel more believable because it doesn't look like the hair is like behind the character or maybe like they're wearing some kind of hairpiece. It feels very much like it's coming from their head. And I'm going to do the same thing on this side as well. Now, I want to advise you that as you draw on her hair, there's not one right way to draw hair on a character. Even though she has a specific texture and usual hair length, hair can be different moment to moment. Like maybe in your sketch, she just brushed her hair, or she just woke up, or she got splashed with water and her hair is wet. There's lots of ways to approach it. So I'm going to show you one way to do it, but I encourage you to be creative. If you've got your own technique or you have a different style, feel free to do that in your drawing. One thing you might want to be mindful of is the part in her hair. I've drawn in the curvy letter V just next to that large curl. And then I'd say really the last thing you want to really pay attention to is the length of her hair, which her hair is pretty short. It's about the length of her chin. So I would say if the hair is extending a lot past the chin, it might feel like she's either grown out her hair or maybe it's not quite Mirabel. So something to keep in mind as you draw her. For mine specifically, I like to go with like a simple curly texture, which just means I'm going to draw in, look like a bunch of letter U shapes, letter C's. I treat it almost like I'm drawing in a cloud, really soft round shapes here. And I'm going to do this really all the way across on both sides here. Now this film is an Oscar-winning animated film. It's actually one of only 4 Disney animated films to win the Oscar since that category was created. The other 3 Disney films to take home this Oscar, one of them featured a pair of sisters and one of them was magical. Which one? Frozen. Another one featured a science prodigy and his robot friend. Big Hero 6. Yeah, Meet the Robinsons, good guess. But yeah, it's Big Hero 6. And then the last one featured a lot of animal characters, including a rabbit and a fox. Yeah, Zootopia, right? So these are the 4 to take home that Oscar. This film, though, got a lot of attention for its music. Does anybody know who wrote the music in this film? Lin-Manuel Miranda, right? And he's actually worked with Disney a handful of times. He not only worked on this film, he also worked on Mary Poppins Returns, the live-action Little Mermaid. But really his first project with Disney is what got him this job. Does anybody know what that was? Moana, right? So he was brought on to Moana to write the music, but his experience on that film was very different than this one due to when he was brought on the project. For Moana, that film had been in development for a while at this point. If you didn't know this, animated films, the average length it takes to make an animated film is about 4 to 6 years. And so this movie had already been in development a few years, and they brought him on later into the game to write the songs to fit the movie they were already making. And so, in some ways that's more challenging. In some ways it kind of, narrows what he needs to focus on for the songs. But for this film, they wanted to work with Lin again after his success on Moana, but they really didn't have a film in mind when they approached him for this one. So they went to Lin and they said, we want to work with you again. Is there a story that you want to tell? And we can bring you on from the very beginning and you can help us craft the story as you write the songs. And so really with this in mind, he just knew right away he wanted to feature a Latin American family and one that had some magical element to them or magical powers. So that was the initial, light bulb idea. And then from there, it evolved into what we got with Encanto. But what this allowed Lin to do was as he's writing the songs, as I mentioned, he can influence the story, and it can really work in tandem versus, filling in the gaps later. A lot of times, Disney has actually done this approach, specifically in the early 90s. They did it with a duo named Howard Ashman and Alan Menken, if you're familiar with their music. If you're not familiar with them, you've definitely heard their songs, because they are the ones who wrote the music for Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, and Aladdin. And these two were very influential on the Disney company, because not only did they write these amazing songs, but they also really sat down with Disney and mentored them on how to write a musical in a really effective way. Because Howard Ashman and Alan Menken came from the Broadway world. And specifically, they had a lot of success on a musical about a plant that eats people. Does anybody know what musical that is? Little Shop of Horrors. That musical got them the Little Mermaid gig. And Howard Ashman, he told the directors working at Disney a lot of advice on how to write a musical that gets your audience invested, as well as how to write great songs. And so some of the advice he gave is he said, for example, there are certain songs in a Broadway show that you want to include to really make your audience fall in love with your character and to move the story forward. And so one type of song that he recommended was what's called an I Want song. And he described an I Want song as a song that happens in the first third of the show or movie, and it usually features your main character sitting down, not always, but often sitting down, and they sing about what they want out of life, what their dream is. And usually the intent of this song is to make the audience fall in love with your character, and because they now know what that character wants, they will root for them to get it the rest of the show. And so that was very, very influential. Of course, the very first I Want song since that was Part of Your World. That was the one that kind of kicked off that tradition. And basically every Disney musical since has had an I Want song. You could go movie by movie and you could identify it. Does anybody know what the I Want song in this film is? Yes, Waiting on a Miracle, exactly, yeah. So that's the song, of course, at Antonio's door ceremony, when her family savagely takes a family picture without her, and then she's really going through it. She's like just really wishing that she had a gift, right? So she could feel like she belongs in the family. So that was very influential, but also Lin really tried to pay attention to the storytelling. The opening song in this film, called The Family Madrigal, he said he took a lot of inspiration from the opening song in Beauty and the Beast called Belle, the one where she's walking through the town. He said he really liked that in just that song alone, the audience finds out who the main character is, what her situation is, what she wants, and what's her story. It really covers a lot of ground. And so with The Family Madrigal, by the time that song ends, you know like all the family members and all of their special gifts. It also lets us know a lot about the story. We're over halfway done with Mirabel, though. Are we having a good time so far? Okay, sounds like we're having fun. If you're looking at your sketch and you're like, I'm not so sure about this, that's okay. We're only halfway done. Right now, it's just the silhouette. It's not her just yet. I'm going to start adding in her facial features so we can bring her to life. And I like to start with her eyes. These are going to rest on the construction line. And I'm going to start off with some circles that are maybe the size of pennies or quarters. This will probably depend on how big you're drawing. And right now she's going to look very spooky. That's okay. We want to wake her up. And something I really love about this character is she is incredibly expressive with her face. Like, animated characters tend to be expressive in general. But when I was watching this movie for the first time, I was really struck by like how pushed and exaggerated this character's emotions are. And it makes her really fun to draw. So if in your sketch you like want to draw her making a silly face, or maybe she's rolling her eyes or giving side eye, she does that a lot with her sister Isabella, so feel free to do so. That's totally up to you. I usually just draw her looking out at you, so I place the pupils more centered here. I'm just going to draw in some smaller circles. And then the key is making sure the eyes are the darkest feature on your page. We actually do this regardless of a character's eye color, because in a rough sketch, you just want your viewer to look your character in the eye. That's how they will connect with your character. And so this is a really effective way of doing that. It really draws your viewer's eyes towards your character's eyes. Now her eyebrows are where a lot of the expression comes from. She's got some really full brows. I'm going to place them, of course, just above those eyes here. And you can, again, go with any expression you'd like. For me, I'm going to start off on the left side here where I have a little bit more of the forehead showing. I'm going to draw in what kind of looks like a little wedge shape here. Kind of like this type of shape. I would definitely recommend going back and shading it in so it stands out. Now, just like on my sketch, you might be seeing the curl cover a good part of the forehead. This doesn't mean you want to skip that eyebrow, because it's definitely going to read as one eyebrow. What you want to do is just lightly draw in the brow under, and then whatever parts are peeking out, you'll lock in those sections. So on my sketch, there's a little piece over here, and then this section right over here. Now for her nose and her mouth, I like to just block out a general proportion first, and then I'll add in those details. So her nose is going to go right about here, underneath where the construction lines meet. And we usually start with a simple shape. So like for Mirabel, I would start with like a little tiny grape, a little tiny olive, maybe even a jelly bean. And then I'm also going to block in where her smile goes, which is about halfway between her nose and her chin. So that's where I'm going to start it, and I'm going to start as if I'm drawing like a Mickey Mouse smile, just really simple letter U shape. Now the nose and the mouth, like I said, are reading more like Mickey Mouse than they are Mirabel. We need to add in a bit more detail. So the first thing that I like to do is when I lock in her nose, I'm going to lock in the sides. So it's going to be like a parentheses on each side. And then for more realistic human characters, we'll also add in their nostrils. And for Mirabel, it's just like a little tiny rainbow connecting to each of those parentheses here. Now for her smile, to make it feel more realistic, we want to add in her lips. And so I'm going to start on the very top part of her smile. You just want to bring like a little hilltop across. For the bottom of her smile, all you need to do is create a letter U shape that just pulls from one side to the other. We draw a lot of smiling characters here at the Academy, and when we draw them smiling, we always end their smile with something called a smile line, a very creative name. It's just a little crease at the end of each side of the smile. It's like a little rainbow, and it makes it feel like the character's cheeks are being pushed up slightly, so it adds a little bit more cuteness to the expression, a little bit more energy as well. We are done with her features, but she wears something on her face. Does anybody know what she wears? She wears glasses, exactly. She's actually the first female lead in a Disney film to wear glasses, which is pretty amazing. I'm going to start drawing in those round frames, one around each eye. Now, one of the things that I love about this movie is how much detail and symbolism they've hidden in plain sight. Like, for example, the way color is used in this film is really interesting because they actually group the family members in color schemes so that way the audience can keep track of who's who. So, like, when you watch the scene in Family Madrigal, for example, you see Mirabel's immediate family, and they wear cool tones. They wear a lot of, like, teal, blue, purple, those types of colors. And then her extended family, like her cousins, her uncle and her aunt, they wear warm tones. So reds, oranges, yellows. But one color is not seen in either group. Does anybody know what color that is? Green. Yeah, who wears green in the film? Bruno, right? So not only is he like sticking out because he's wearing a different color, but also she is the only other member of the family that really has like green on her outfit. It's specifically her glasses are green. And so the green connection brings these two characters together because they're kind of the outcasts or misfits of the family. They feel like a little out of place at times. But having her glasses be the thing that's green is a really great way of saying that Mirabel sees Bruno for who he is, right? Like she sees the good in him, and she's the family member to convince him to come back to the family, right? So I think that's pretty interesting the way color is used. There's also animal symbolism in the film too. Ironically, the character who talks to animals doesn't have as much symbolism, like Antonio. He just has all the animal friends. But Luisa, for example, she's accompanied by a certain animal. Does anybody know what type? A donkey, right? And donkeys are known for carrying burdens, right? So that's definitely drawing a comparison there. But then also Bruno has an animal friend. What type of animal? Rats, right? And those are animals that are associated with being blamed for things or, being ostracized. A lot of people aren't fans of rats, right? And so that is really to show kind of where Bruno's at emotionally. So I think that's really interesting, all the little details they've hid in there. Once you've drawn in Mirabel's glasses, that is the final step for drawing her. Anything else you want to add is extra credit. So if you want to draw in the candle, maybe you want to draw in another family member. If you're feeling really ambitious, draw the entire casita behind her. That would be amazing. Add in any extra credit you'd like, and then your very last step should be signing your name nice and proud